Prepare for takeoff.
Fans of the original X-Wing games and Rogue Squadron from the 90s have had very little to go on for the past 2 decades, but that's all changed with the release of Star Wars Squadrons. This modern-day reimagining offers one of the most realistic and immersive experiences in video games, thanks to VR and its super wide support, in addition to its fluidity and visual fidelity, all thanks to the Frostbite 3 engine. We recommend graphics cards at 5 price points: entry level, low end, mid-range, high end and enthusiast. We have collectively decided on the card we would recommend for each of these categories and have benchmarked said cards at the appropriate resolutions. Up first is the ever popular Ryzen 5 3400G APU. It's often enough for light gaming and has been our go-to for our $400 budget build on the site ever since it launched. You also have the flexibility of adding a discrete graphics card later down the line if you need more graphical horsepower for your games. For Star Wars Squadrons though, you may not need anything more. At 720p and low graphical settings, we saw an average frame rate of 85 FPS and 1% lows of 39 FPS. I would have liked to have seen more consistent frame times from a scientific standpoint, but due to the nature of the game, I never really found any issues with stutter. Moving up to 1600 by 900 now, and 3400G hit exactly 60 frames per second for the average and almost half that in 1% lows with 31 FPS. Stutter was more noticeable here, and as we're already using the low preset, there's not much that can be done to improve performance outside of overclocking. Now we'll turn our attention to discrete graphics and look at the performance of 5 cards at the popular desktop resolution of 1920 by 1080. Our low-end choice, the GTX 1650 Super, can be had from $170, and in our benchmark run at ultra settings gave a mightily impressive average frame rate of 154 FPS and 1% lows of 111. The 1650 then is enough for even high refresh rate 1080p displays, though not 240Hz ones. Our mid-range recommendation, the RX 5600 XT, stacked 100 FPS on those results, and higher-end parts added only a further 10% each. We see the RTX 3080 stand on its own again with an average of 436 FPS, though frame times weren't as consistent. This deviation isn't likely to go noticed though, with 1% lows above 280 FPS. Upping the resolution to 2560 by 1440 and the story remains the same. The RTX 3080 charges ahead with a 278 FPS average, however we do see more consistent frame times evident by the 210 FPS 1% lows. Again, the RX 5700 XT leads the RTX 2070 Super by 10%, but both cards output over 180 FPS, making them suitable for 144Hz 1440p monitors. In fairness, the same could be said for the 5600 XT with its 158 FPS average. It separates itself from the 1650 Super by 66%, a healthy gain for a card that costs about 70% more. The GTX 1650 Super falls just shy of 100 FPS with its 95 FPS average, but this is still a remarkable result. All cards are sufficient for 1440p gaming at 60Hz, but you'll want to look at the 5600 XT or above if you're on a higher refresh rate display. 4K gaming is on the rise, and we've seen a push from both AMD and Nvidia in their marketing towards this high resolution. The amount of VRAM and its bandwidth can be a bottleneck here for the GPU, so you usually want a card with about 8 gigs of VRAM as a minimum. We saw a max of 3.7 gigabytes VRAM usage on our 4 gigabyte GTX 1650 Super, and this resulted in a 52 FPS average frame rate. VRAM didn't appear to be a limiting factor, as we saw a fairly consistent frame times with 41 FPS for 1% lows and 100% GPU usage at all times. Expectedly, higher end cards produce higher numbers. AMD's RX 5600 XT boosts frame rates by 70%, resulting in an 88 FPS average and 75 FPS for 1% lows. The advantage held by the 5700 XT at previous resolutions has been diminished to a mere 2% of 4K, but both it and the RTX 2070 Super see a decent 25% jump over the 5600 XT, with frame rates in excess of 100 FPS. And as is tradition now, we once again see the new Ampere card in a league of its own with a mammoth 170 FPS. Frame times aren't as tight as we've seen with other cards at 4K. 4.7 gig was the maximum VRAM usage observed, and in combination with the latest 456.71 drivers at the time of recording, and our 5 GHz 10900K, it's hard to say exactly why this is. We did see one core pinned at 100% most times, so individual core frequency may be the limiting factor. Still, 1% lows were 123 FPS and resulted in a smooth gaming experience overall at 4K and ultra quality settings. As this game ran fantastically on all discrete graphics cards tested, we saw little point in providing an accompanying optimization guide. But there are a few things that I'd like to note. As we've just touched on, the game has a strong single core reliance and it's likely to be a bottleneck if you have a powerful graphics card. The 3400G, at a resolution of 1600 by 900 using the low quality preset, frequently saw 75% CPU usage. Accordingly, we would recommend a processor with a minimum of 4 cores and 8 threads and a high single core clock speed. It's likely that something like an overclocked Intel i5 10600K would outclass a Ryzen 7 3700X because of this. In summary then, the 3400G is just capable of 60 FPS at 900p provided you use low quality settings. Outside of dropping to 720p or overclocking, there's little else to be done to gain performance here. For 1080p gaming, we saw all cards in excess of 100 FPS with the GTX 1650 Super providing 154 FPS, making any similar card or above ideal for 144Hz displays. At 1440p, all cards were more than capable of 60 FPS. Again, the lowest end card, the 1650 Super, gave a 95 FPS average. If you plan on gaming at 120Hz or above though, then you'll want to look at the RX 5600 XT as a minimum. And finally, 4K was a little too much for our $170 1650, evidenced by its 52 FPS average. Dropping the settings may be able to help, but if you want the highest graphical fidelity, then it's the RX 5600 XT upwards. If you own or plan on owning a 144Hz 4K display, then the RTX 3080 is the only card really worth considering, as it produces an average frame rate of 170 FPS. That said, you could dial the settings back on the RX 5700 XT or RTX 2070 Super, and that would get you most of the way there. So that was our look at the performance you can expect in Star Wars Squadrons. As we alluded to at the start of this review, the game has excellent VR and widescreen support, both of which we've played and you can watch over here. But that's it from me. If you enjoyed the video, then please leave a like, leave any comments or questions below, and don't forget to hit the notification bell and subscribe so you can see more of this content in future. Other than that, thank you for watching.